Just didn't want anybody to know. He feels like he's predisposed to that 3%, I feel like. Thank you. All right. So now we've got another panel that we're going to do. Also, we're heading towards lunch. Lunch will be at 1 o'clock if you're curious about that. I meant to say that earlier. But this next panel will be hosted by James Seyffart. He doesn't care which way you say it. He made that clear. He's a CFA for Bloomberg intelligence research analyst and focusing on the broader asset management industry with specialized expertise in the coverage of funds like ETFs, mutual funds, and hedge funds. He's going to host and interview our panel. On the panel is John Hoffman, head of distribution partnerships at Grayscale. And prior to joining Grayscale, he was head of America's ETFs and index strategies at Invesco. And Bruno Caratori is the co-founder and COO at Hashdex. And also Steve McClurg is a CEA at Canary Capital. So please welcome these four guys. They're going to host this panel for you. And it's the Exchange Traded Funds panel. Your mics are in the seats. Your mics are in the seats for you. And then have a good time, guys.
Thank you.
Yep.
All right. I'll let everyone give a little bit of an intro on themselves too, but my name is James Seyffart, mostly known in the space for covering the launches and potential launches of various crypto ETFs, including Bitcoin and Ethereum, obviously. And we're going to get into what is next when Litecoin ETF. But why don't I let you guys, for most of you, I'm sure you know who Grayscale is, so I'll let John just give a little background on what Grayscale is, and then we'll go on to Bruno and Steve.
Maybe I'll take a second to introduce Grayscale, but just by way of introduction, my name is John Hoffman. I lead the distribution partnerships and marketing team at Grayscale. Joined the firm about 18 months ago after 20 years at Invesco, where I previously ran the ETF business, and made the transition over to crypto, just seeing the parallels between how ETFs developed in the early 2000s to how crypto is developing now from a network effects perspective. And I won't do the intro on Grayscale, but the quick version is we're the world's largest crypto-focused investment management firm, manage over 30 capabilities from passively managed, actively managed, single token, multi-token, active and passive, delivered in ETFs and private funds. So I think I ran over my intro time there, but I'll pass it over to Bruno.
I'll speak to Hashdex a little. So I'm one of the co-founders there and the CEO. Much like Grayscale, we're a asset manager and ETF issuer exclusively dedicated to crypto. We manage over 30 products across ETFs, ETPs, mutual funds, and these are available in over 8 countries right now. These countries are in Europe, Latin America, and most recently in the US, where we recently launched the Hashdex Nasdaq Crypto Index US ETF, which turned out to be the first crypto index ETF of spot products to be launched and available for US investors.
Hi, my name is Stephen McClurg. I'm the CEO of Canary Capital. We are primarily a private placement and hedge fund platform focused on crypto. We also dabble in ETFs a little bit. A lot of the other ETFs that I was involved in was when I was the founder of Valkyrie and some of the things that we did there. And I'm proud to say that we were the first people to file for the Litecoin ETF in the US.
Yeah, so we're a bunch of, like, the term I like to use is suit coiners. We're a bunch of TradFi guys that believe in what DeFi is building here. So let's get into, you mentioned it, let's talk about the Litecoin ETF. You were the first ones to file. Our view is it's going to be approved. It's a matter of when, not if. I want to go to you, Steve. Like, I kind of thought Litecoin ETF had a decent chance of getting approved under the prior administration, which we can talk about all the other altcoin ETFs out there. Those probably wouldn't have got done, but I thought Litecoin would get done. I'm curious what your view is on whether or not Litecoin would have gotten approved under the Gensler administration and why you think that.
Yeah, so look, there were 2 reasons why we filed the Litecoin ETF. The first one was Charlie getting involved in the Litecoin Foundation again. I thought that was pretty significant, and it brings so much to the Litecoin community. And then second of all, Gensler gave a speech where he said that Bitcoin, ETH, and Litecoin are not securities. And there were 2 that were already approved, and I was like, okay, well, why is anybody fighting for a Litecoin ETF? Here we go. So we just, put it together, thinking that under the old administration, even if Trump didn't get elected, Litecoin would probably move forward. What's happened though, and look, we already received, I would say just positive response from regulators on the Litecoin ETF from under Gensler. And we thought that this thing was going to move a little bit faster than it has. But what did happen though is a new administration got into a place. It took a long time to confirm the new SEC chair, and I still don't believe that there's a new director of trading and markets, which is super important at the SEC. So those things kind of need to be in place, and I get that the SEC is waiting for a new head of trading and markets, for the chair to be confirmed. And now they're working through a framework. And this framework is really going to determine how everything works, not just one or two things. So that is really what's holding it up right now. But outside of that framework being published, I've got no doubt that Litecoin will be the next ETF to launch.
Yeah, so for those that don't know, which I hope you don't know because it's kind of really boring, but essentially to launch an ETF like the ETFs we're talking about up here, you have to go through two processes. One of them is a 19B4, which goes through the Division of Trading and Markets. That's what held up the Bitcoin ETFs forever. That's what Grayscale sued over, dealing with that department. And the other department is corporate finance that deals with the S1s and the risk disclosures. So there's all these processes, these deadlines. It's very bureaucratic. And it seems to me like the SEC is just kind of back into, they're going to probably go to the final deadline. I'm curious, so like we have a bunch of Litecoin filings out there. I want to get into the index products next, but I'm curious from you guys, John, like you probably can't even answer this, but I'm just curious, when do you think we actually do see an approval? Do you think it's going to happen this year?
So, yeah, I think you're in a better position to speculate on like the likelihood of an approval. What I can do is talk about some of the facts, though, that we see in the market today. So Grayscale launched a Litecoin trust in 2020, August of 2020. So it's coming up on a 5-year live track record. Ticker is LTCN. It's about a $200 million fund today, trades on the OTC markets. What's really interesting is that product actually is trading at a discount to net asset value right now. So yesterday it closed at a 6% discount to net asset value. Most of 2024 it was trading at a pretty significant premium, but just recently we've seen it move to a discount. So for all of you that like Litecoin, there's an opportunity to invest in LTCN at a 6% discount. And again, in the event that it does get approved, you're essentially going to capture that discount because ETFs will trade, very near intrinsic value. So LTCN is something that we filed for, I think, a couple days after Steve's firm did, to uplist to an ETF as well. So we did that, I believe it was February 10th of this year. That starts the statutory clock that James was referring to, 240 days out, gets you to October 10th of this year. That's the final deadline. We blew through the first couple of checkpoints, so the March deadline, came and went. We received a delay there. The May deadline came and went. We received a delay there. There'll be another checkpoint in August. But look, I think that a October 10th timeline has a high level of probability, and I think what we'll see is that 6% discount should be trending into net asset value as there's more predictability about the likelihood of it uplisting. So to some degree, the market is pricing this as not a guarantee. Having said that, I don't read too much into that because when we were doing the Bitcoin uplisting, we literally had the approval in hand, and GBTC was still trading at a 2% discount, and even with 100% certainty. So I would monitor that discount for folks that, look, if you like Litecoin at fair value, you got to love it at a 6% discount. So and that moves around through time. So probably a roundabout answer to your question, high likelihood of approval based on what we're seeing, and we're doing everything possible to move that forward.
Yeah, our official odds are right now 90% it's going to get approved in 2025. And honestly, we're not going to go much higher. We would never go to 100% just because crazier things have happened. But Bruno, you guys, it's a little different. We can go back to GDLC on Grayscale side, but you guys have an index product. So you're going through it a little bit of a different way. Can you talk through what you were trying to get through with this SEC with your index product, and maybe talk about the index product down in Brazil as well?
Absolutely. So, yes, as you said, we call ourselves an index shop primarily, right? And we've been following the developments here in the US from this filing and index product perspective. The product that we currently have trading holds only Bitcoin and Ether. We look forward to the day when it will hold more assets. We have a filing out that I can't speak much to, other than the fact that in the process of trying to get that product in the hands of investors, we've been constantly engaging with the commission. They won't tell you much, but they'll give you signals, right? And as Steven mentioned here, it does look like they're working on a broad framework to accept or reject listed products of crypto assets in general. We think that this is coming down the pike soon, in the coming months, so much like I think, John thinks. And, Litecoin to me seems like the non-controversial part of this framework. We think it's healthy that they have a framework. The reason I say we're confident that they're working on a framework is that they were very keen on learning about Hashdex's experience both in Latin America and in Europe, as we work with regulators there to establish a framework that would let them systematically go through filings and more efficiently accept or reject, in turn giving investors all the investor protection that we know that they want to do. So they were keen on learning about how other jurisdictions are doing that. I think they're also looking forward to not having to go through 70 filings one-to-one, including a Millennia 2X ETF, and putting their time into this, right? So it makes perfect sense. So that's what we've been following. And I don't know if I'm supposed to give those predictions, but we're confident that in the US this year, Litecoin will be in either an index ETF or very likely in its own standalone. And as James mentioned, we've had this experience in other geos for a little over 4 years now. So Hashdex's ETF in Brazil and Europe may have been the first, actual ETF listed product with creations and redemptions to hold Litecoin. And our ETF tracks the NASDAQ Crypto Index that we co-developed with NASDAQ a while ago. This index currently has 9 assets. Litecoin is one of them. Throughout history, this index must have held, I think, close to 20 assets. It's a dynamic index, so some come in and others come out. And I know Litecoin to be one of the assets that has always been in the index, probably along with just Bitcoin and Ether. So it's got its status there.
All right, I want to hear from, so we just talked about, we beat around the bush a little bit with the SEC and the conversations that are happening. You can't give us extreme detail, but let's go to you, Steve. I want to hear, like you said, conversation with the Gensler administration was going well. How's it going with this new crypto task force? Does it seem reinvigorated? I'm just curious to give general terms around where things are going with the Litecoin filing, obviously, but just in general around crypto with Hester and the way that she's running things.
Well, in the current administration, there's nothing specific. It's all a very broad framework. So we're not hearing anything like, oh, we like this token, we like this one's not, we're not hearing any of that. It's very much a, hey, and it's more questions than answers. It's a, hey, well, what do you think about, this category of tokens, and how do you feel about this or this or this, and a lot of it is really coming down to, they're looking at a framework that differentiates between various types of tokens, right? So, at one point they were looking at, well, these are currencies versus protocols, or, well, these are securities versus non-securities versus art or NFTs or meme coins, and they're trying to figure out how they want to break these things out so that they can put that into a framework and what the requirements are, for those types of things. Oddly enough, we've heard very positive things about NFTs, because they are digital art and they should be treated like art or collectibles. Even meme coins are sort of falling in that collectible category. But I'm saying these things because ultimately we don't know, because things have been fluid and we don't know where everything's gonna pan out. but we are seeing some, I would say, just some signs of what's to come. The other thing, once the framework is created, for instance, there's really two different categories of ETFs. There's a few different ones, but two primary ones. There's 33 Act, which primarily do not hold securities, and then there's 40 Act, which hold securities or mostly securities. And coming up with a framework to determine which are securities and which aren't securities is going to be important to what kind of vehicle you use. And then once you figure out what kind of vehicle you use, they're looking at things like, okay, well, if it's a single token, what does the volume have to be on exchanges? What does the volume have to be in the U.S. on exchanges? What does the market cap have to be? So these are all the types of conversations that are being had right now. We don't know, again, where it's going to end up landing, but if I had to guess, it's probably top 15 tokens are going to be, or maybe even top 10 will have the ability to have a single token ETF. And by the way, this isn't new. This isn't something like, a lot of people might, or some people might think that's like an attack on crypto or something specific to crypto. But I don't know, 15 years ago, when I was a fixed income manager and building an ETF business around fixed income back then that was ultimately backed by Invesco, where we were working on these new types of products for fixed income. And we were trying to hold asset-backed securities because the old firm that I was at, we specialized in non-mortgage asset-backed securities. And we were trying to build ETFs around that. And the SEC had a lot to say about it. And ultimately, we came to a place to where a diversified fixed income fund could only hold 15% in illiquid asset-backed securities, because there are some other things to determine too. There's a thing called level 1, level 2, level 3 securities. And ETFs have to have highly liquid securities in them, and only a certain percentage can be, unliquid or non-liquid. So that's really what they're trying to determine in crypto. Is like, okay, well, what determines if it's liquid or not? What's highly liquid? And I think ultimately a single token ETF will have to be from a highly liquid token, and that might even be top 5. We don't know yet, but that's what we're looking at.
Can I add something there? I don't think it contradicts what Steven's saying, but complementing, when we were engaging with them, as I said earlier, they were especially interested in how regulators in other countries approached it. And I'll admit, so a part of my story here is self-serving, but we told them the story of how the stock exchange and the regulators in Sweden approached it. And they took the stance that all the assets that are constituents of the NASDAQ crypto index are allowed even for single token ETFs in Sweden, right? And if you've followed crypto long enough, which I imagine most of you have, Sweden has been, Sweden was a very pioneering jurisdiction. XBT, which was one of the, perhaps only after BIT from Grayscale, was one of the very first regulated crypto investing products. So, and the reason I bring this up is they weren't looking just at liquidity. In crypto, there's the difficulty of determining how do you measure liquidity, right? Which exchanges are you going to consider? And the reason that the Swedish regulator adopted the NASDAQ framework is that NASDAQ positions it as a security-first industry benchmark. And it has very stringent vetting criteria on which exchanges and custodians it uses, and it measures dimensions such as being regulated, having transparent surveillance practices, having open APIs. So there is that dimension too, Stephen, and I think that the SEC will be looking into this, not just which are the ones that are big enough and liquid enough and that deserve being in a listed vehicle, but how can we measure these things in a reliable way that keeps investors protected?
Go ahead, John.
I'll just add, just building on this topic, maybe putting a capstone on it to some degree. I mean, the change in tenor is 180 degrees. I would say at the most basic level, it went from, very unfriendly but highly predictable to, what I describe now. There's still some work to be done, maybe a little bit less predictable, but highly certain in terms of what we're gonna, what we're gonna get here. So I think it's been a 180. As we've engaged with the staff recently, the difference is stark. I mean, again, a couple years ago, we literally sued the SEC to drive through the Bitcoin ETPs. And today, the level of engagement is like nothing we've seen in any time before. And I think the questions are really, really good. They're from practitioners that understand this, and they're willing to engage and give feedback. A kind of anecdote to this, we were recently in to talk about staking in ETH, and we were talking about the process that we would use. And one of the points of feedback was, well, why wouldn't you just stake more? And we were thinking, we actually want to find a good ground here that is, so I think they're very much engaging. The tone has changed more than 180 degrees. It's come in, engage, have thoughtful conversations, not come in, engage, and we're going to send enforcement. And by the way, during that engagement meeting, there'll be enforcement in the meeting. It has completely changed.
Yeah, I mean, overall, and this is my description is, we went from a world of what is going to get through the SEC to get these things approved, and how is it going to happen, to, as Steven and Bruno were kind of hinting at, like, where is the line going to be drawn that they're going to stop letting these things through, right? Like, as I think Bruno mentioned, there's literally a 2x Melania filing out there, which...
You put out a chart. What is there, 80?
There's over 80. There's over 80 filings related. Yeah, everyone's filing for everything. A lot of these guys are some of the people that have filed for those exact things. And our view is like, I just don't know where the SEC is going to draw the line. Maybe it's some of those meme coins and things. Maybe it's going to be on liquidity like Steven was talking about. So yeah, it's just very interesting to figure out where the line is going to be drawn. But where I do think is the line is not going to be stopping Litecoin, which is what we've been talking about.
Not least because Litecoin is one of the, has existed for the longest, right? A very pristine track record. It's, among the assets, especially the non-Bitcoin, non-Ether, highly liquid on a comparative basis. So, yes.
All right, I want to go to, so we were pretty bearish on the ETH ETFs and the amount of assets they were going to get, and we weren't bearish enough. I will say that Steve was very, very bearish and way more correct than I was. I mean,
you owe me a burger.
Yeah, I do owe you a burger. I owe you a PubKey burger. So they have like something like 7% of the assets of Bitcoin ETF, despite being more like 25% of the market cap of Bitcoin. I just think an individual Litecoin ETF isn't necessarily going to get like tons and tons of assets in demand. I think the demand for Bitcoin via the ETF wrapper is more likely to come via the index products that you guys have, Hashdex. Obviously, there's going to be demand for the single products like Canary's filing and LTCN. People always like to trade these things. It's always going to be a thing, but I think most of the actual dollar demand is going to be coming from the index products. I'm just curious to hear, I guess, John, and to start, like, do you agree with that? And like, how are clients that you're talking to thinking about Litecoin and these index products versus LTCN specifically?
Yeah. So the index product you're referencing, GDLC, it holds 5 tokens, multi-token approach that we have. We're coming up on the 240-day clock on that in July. Again, I think the market anticipates that that's going to uplist to an ETP. Specifically around Litecoin. Look, I've been a part of over 300 ETF launches, and it's very difficult to anticipate demand, and I've been wrong more times than I've been right on that front. Bitcoin, I think we all knew was going to be enormous. When you put together 2 of the most significant, technological innovations, and you make it easier, simpler, more convenient, that was not a surprise. ETH, I think there was a pretty wide divide on. One way to think about this, just quantitatively, is the Bitcoin market cap is $2.1 trillion. There's $130 billion in the ETFs today. So that's about 6% capture of token. And again, that's in a year. So to put that in perspective, that's pretty incredible that the ETFs now hold more token than Satoshi, 1.1 million tokens. But that's a 6% capture of token. Go to ETH, it's a $340 billion market cap. It's $9 billion in the ETFs today, so it's about a 3% capture of market cap. Litecoin, I think, is around $7.5 billion. So if you take that kind of midpoint, let's call it 5%, you're talking about $400 million of flows, $500 million of flows. But I think that's just a mathematical way of looking at this. Ultimately, the role that Bitcoin is playing in the portfolio, low correlation, high potential absolute return, I think people are going to be watching the attributes of Litecoin and the characteristics associated with it, and you know, I think we could see more demand than that. The other way to do it mathematically is, again, LTCN is $200 million. GBTC was $28 billion when we came to market, so you can kind of like triangulate off of that to figure out flows. But you know, I would think as we continue to click down token, I think we're going to see, you know, less demand as we go down cap.
Yeah, I also want to add something I should have said when I started is, like, people in this space specifically look at the Bitcoin ETFs and they're like, well, Ethereum is a failure, whereas it's a $9 billion category, which is like in the ETF world is a tremendous success. Like getting hundreds of millions of dollars in your first year, I mean, all of these guys would sign up for that every day of the week for any product category that they're launching. So like that's another thing. Like even it's not gonna, like the Litecoin ETFs are not gonna be as big as the Bitcoin ETFs, but that doesn't mean they won't be successful products in their own right. So I wanted to say that. You wanted to say something, Bruno, I think.
Thanks for saying that, because I agree. You know, Ethereum was a failure because of you know, like a bar that's just abnormal with Bitcoin, right? And I personally consider it a success. But I'll agree with what you said, James, in that a lot of the demand will come from the index we reckon. And I'll speak a little to the factor we're seeing that's going to lead to this, is that we think that the next frontier of adoption of crypto as an investment is the intermediary channel, right? I think crypto has been, from the beginning, largely retail-driven. Even in January of last year, as the Bitcoin products came about, it was still largely the self-directed investor, either a retail small investor or even a wealthier one. But I think over and over, not least because the regulation has taken a completely different stance now, regulators have taken a completely different stance, professional investors are looking seriously at investing in crypto. And in our conversations, a lot of them will default to an index. They are. It's easier to convince them of a broader crypto thesis than it is of specific assets. They also don't have the time to build opinion on dozens of assets. So we think that they'll be looking into providers that can give them an index, and that's where I think the likes of Litecoin will end up getting a lot of their flows.
Steve, you have any?
Yeah, I mean, kind of going back to, the thing you were saying earlier, I think the bar that everybody was setting for ETH was 25% of the flows of Bitcoin, and that was basically, kind of a take on its market cap versus Bitcoin. I was arguing that the bar was probably more like 10% and below or higher than 10%. I think Litecoin. So overall, ETH, even though it's a tremendous product to raise a lot of capital and anybody would take, it did, underperform expectations significantly. I actually think that Litecoin is going to overperform expectations significantly for a couple of reasons. One of them is, for years, CNBC has had 3 tickers: Bitcoin, ETH, Litecoin. So there's brand recognition there, even though it's a smaller token by market cap. And then the other thing that I think is really important is even in the name convention. I mean, we all know how, in this room, how Litecoin was created and the genesis of Litecoin, but not many people know that. But what they do know is that there's Bitcoin and there's Litecoin, and they kind of sound the same. And Bitcoin has a Bitcoin's about $100,000, and Litecoin's about $100. And psychologically, investors are going to say, "Oh, it's a cheaper Bitcoin. I'm going to buy it." I mean, it's kind of a dumb way to look at it, but that's how retail investors think. So I actually do think that it's going to outperform for kind of dumb reasons, but it will outperform expectations.
Yeah, I think part of the reason the ETH underperformed is, I mean, Steve, you were a big proponent of this. There's no staking, so you're basically not getting the yield, which is not a problem you have to worry about with something like Litecoin. I want to go keep talking about the index product because everyone up here seems to agree most of the actual dollar demand is going to come from these index products. John hinted at the fact that they have their Grayscale digital large cap product coming due for final decision on July 2nd. Hashdex, he can't really specifically talk about too many details about this product. They have a product right now that's Bitcoin and ETH, but they have filings out there to add Litecoin and other assets that would meet their index requirements for the products they have elsewhere. But I want to throw something out there. One of my pet theories, it's not my base case. Obviously, I think GDLC, there's also one, a BitW, another product. So there's two different ways, right? So there's two products that are actively out there that are not ETFs in the same way that we had to go through GBTC and ETH and some of these other trust products. Then there's also Hashdex's version where they have an ETF out there. They just want to add other assets. And I think the SEC is going to approve all of these at this point. There's two ways they can do it, right? For the most part, it's like 88, 85 to 90% Bitcoin and Ethereum, and then 10 to 15% other assets, including Litecoin. And the way they do that is either A, they lean on some of that illiquid stuff that Steve was talking about and saying, these products don't yet meet the requirement or we're not ready to approve them in an individual wrapper, or they come out with a framework when they approve these products sometime in July, and we actually could see, so we talk about October being the timeline that we think a Litecoin ETF could get approved. I think part of the problem is the SEC seems a little bit understaffed right now. There's a lot of people that took those packages. Things aren't moving as fast as they would like, I don't think. If you listen to Hester's interviews, you kind of get the gist that things are moving a little slowly, but they like the direction they're going. But I think there's like a slim chance that we could see some of these single coin ETFs actually get approved some point in July. Again, not my base case, but I'm curious what your guys' thoughts are. Like, do you agree with those are the two avenues where we could see approval, or is there another avenue that you guys think? Steve, you're nodding your head a bunch, so.
Well, I'm neutral on this because I don't have any index products, but I'm also a large holder of GDLC. I'm a big fan of it, and I'm actually holding it, betting that it could get approved. But at the same time, I think the odds are probably greater 50% that it won't. But in case I'm wrong, I'll make money, right? So I've been buying GDLC at like massive discounts, and it's already, I think it's already down to like 11% now.
11%, yeah.
And I mean, at 11%, it's a buy. I mean, because if it does, you know, if I'm wrong, and you know, the 40% chance that it does get approved is right, then you just picked up a 11% clip. Why wouldn't you do that? You know. So yeah, I'm making a big bet on GDLC. I hope it gets approved. I want it to get approved. I want Hashdex to get approved. I think the market needs indexes, but you know, I just don't think the SEC is ready yet. And I think that they're going to try to figure out a way to punt in July. I just hope that they don't.
Yeah, Steve and I are on opposite ends there. I think they're going to approve just because of how pro Hester has been. But the last few months and how slow things have moved has kind of like made me a little more skeptical than I was even just a month or two ago. John, you wanted to say something?
Yeah, I mean, look, I'm not going to like pontificate on the. Well, first off, Steve, we got to hire you on the sales team. Thanks for all the GDLC discussions there.
By the way, but by LTCN as well. I mean, yeah. Duh.
There you go. So, yeah, I won't necessarily guess on the likelihood of uplisting. I'm going to look at what the market is pricing in. I think to Steve's point earlier, a couple months ago, GDLC was at a 45% discount. That discount is collapsing up to, you know, now at 11%. So the market is anticipating and is pricing real time the likelihood of that uplisting. So I think that there's the two paths you described are both potential. There's also some new ground with, you know, things like PRIV that started to open up the illiquid asset portion of the market, and there's a lot of precedent, you know, for this filing in a legacy structure because it's 90% Bitcoin and ETH, and those are already, you know, approved, right? So you're falling within that 15% illiquid portion where it holds XRP, AVAX, and Solana today, and again, that can rebalance. I think the bigger picture here, though, that Bruno was also talking about, James, Steve as well, to some degree, is just this, if you think about the role of crypto in a diversified portfolio, I think this is going to be a massive category, these broad-based index solutions. If you think about the NASDAQ 100, the QQQ, which is a fund that I used to manage, you know, in the 90s, you wanted tech exposure. I'm going to buy 100 tech names, and I'm going to been a great way to get exposure to the 100 largest tech companies. I think in crypto, people are going to say something similar. I've got Bitcoin. You know what? I want a diversified basket. I don't know what the future is going to hold for each particular token, and I don't have the time to diligence every single token, you know, out there. But I want exposure to this emerging trend, and I think that's going to soak up a lot of net new capital. I think to Bruno's point around the intermediated wealth segment. So think about financial advisors. They manage $35 trillion in this country today. They're generally at zero right now. I'd say 5% of them are allocating. 90% are curious, interested, doing the work. 5% will never allocate. That 90% is coming online a 3% allocation from them is $1 trillion of capital that's going to be coming into this market over the next 3 to 5 years. And that's just one channel that is starting to turn on.
Yeah, so I guess we're running low on time, but I would echo what they're saying here. I think the index products, I don't know if they'll get more assets than the Bitcoin ETFs, but I do think they will be at least the second biggest category as far as the crypto ETF space goes. But I'm curious, like, when you're talking to clients about Litecoin, like, what are you talking about, like, when you talk to them about the investment thesis, the index products, or the direct exposure, like, what do those conversations look like? If you guys got, like, 10 seconds each, I guess, or 15 seconds each.
I'll put in one nugget. And we've talked to clients in Europe and Brazil a lot about all the assets in the index, right? And especially in LATAM, so Brazil and Chile where we're present, I don't know if the community likes this, but the narrative of the digital silver is really compelling. And the crypto insiders down in Brazil, down in Chile, they appreciate Litecoin's track record, length of existence, the very infallible track record. So it is definitely one of the protagonists of the whole crypto scene.
Anyone? I mean, you talked about it before with the $100 retail stuff, but I don't know if you have anything else to add on that.
I mean, I don't really have an active product, so I'm not pitching it. But
yeah. John, you're head of distribution, so you're talking to these RAs.
Look, I think that a lot of the topics that Bruno just hit on, I mean, the digital silver, the track record, the diversification of the owner base, all of that is interesting. I think when you look at the correlation properties vis-a-vis Bitcoin and ETH, it's been a slightly different return pattern. But quite frankly, our narrative has shifted a bit recently based on the pricing dynamics of the publicly traded fund, which is if you like Litecoin, you can buy it on exchange at fair value plus or minus a spread, or you can buy it in this trust structure at a discount to fair value. And if you expect these approvals, that discount is going to collapse to zero. I can't say that with definity, but I can tell you, I think all of us as ETF experts would say that is going to collapse to zero with an approval of an ETF. It's just a function of when. And so, I think it's probably the most efficient way to access Litecoin today in that structure. And I think that, that's really where our discussion has shifted recently.
Yeah, so TLDR, Litecoin ETF, matter of when, not if. And it's going to happen this year. Thank you, everyone.